Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just ask you to take your seats, if that's okay. Yeah. My name is Louise Allen. I am going to be your moderator for the event today, which is called Shaping Ireland's Creative Future, Measuring What Matters, Culture, Creativity and the Common Good. I'm not going to formally welcome you because I'm going to hand over to Sarah Glennie, my colleague, to do that. But just to say, this is the second in a new series of events from Creative Futures Academy. The first one took place actually in this space in November, and it was focused on screen-based media and design. But really what we're trying to do with these sessions is look at how we can support the development of the creative and cultural sector using a collective voice to influence policy. So maybe just keep that in mind as we're rolling through the speakers today. A quick bit of housekeeping before we kick off. Just look around you and note your emergency exits. There's one over here, there's one at the back. There's nobody getting through that door. There's so much stuff behind it, so don't go that way. The restrooms, a lot of people were struggling to find them this morning. They're out the door behind you, through the next set of doors, and then you're going to go left and left again. I think we've just put signage up so that you can find your way more easily. That's for the women's restrooms. The men's restrooms are on the upper ground floor opposite the white recital hall entrance, so you can just ask people as you go out if you're lost and you're looking for direction. And there's also accessible toilets available on both levels. The other piece is just if you have a mobile phone, would you mind putting it to silent? You're more than welcome to take photos, but just please have your phones on silent. And also just to say, today we are recording this event. We did have signs up in the foyer as you entered, so hopefully you're all okay with that. I'm going to now introduce Sarah Glennie, who is the Director of the National College of Art and Design. Sarah is leading on the really exciting and much needed redevelopment of the NCAD campus, which sits in the heart of the Liberties in Dublin 8. And it's a huge project that is going to engage that community, which is already engaged with NCAD, but I suppose in a much deeper and fuller way. And it's also really important for securing the future of engaged creative practice in both Dublin and nationally. So Sarah, I'd like to welcome you to the stage, and hopefully you'll give us some insight as to the context for this event. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. We're all really welcome here today for the second session in this new series, which we've started with the CFA. We've got a very packed schedule today and some extraordinary speakers. So there isn't a break. So if you just need to pop out to the loo at any time, get some water, take a bit of air, don't feel embarrassed about doing that. We're really grateful for you all taking the time to be here today and for your presence with us. We've got colleagues from DEFRAS, the HEA, local authorities, higher education partners, and many artists and community groups. It's a really good cross-section. So thank you all for taking the time to be here and for travelling to be with us today as well, because people have come from all across Ireland, which is fantastic. We've got great speakers, so I'm going to be very brief. I just wanted to say a few words to set a bit of context. Firstly, some of you may be new to the Creative Futures Academy. So for those of you not familiar with it, and just to explain a little bit, the CFA is a collaboration between NCAD, IADT and UCD. It was established in 2021 as part of the government's delivery on future skills need. And collectively, we work with a wide range of industry partners to ensure that our programmes meet the needs of an ever-changing creative and cultural sector, as well as developing lifelong learning opportunities to support creatives throughout their careers. And the connections that we've built with key organisations in doing that across the full spectrum of the creative and cultural space, and also, importantly, the value we've kind of gained from working together as three higher education institutions, each representing a really diverse range of creative practice. That's really informed the next phase and our thinking around the future of the Creative Futures Academy, and a developing focus on the ways in which we can play a role in helping to facilitate a space for people both in the sector, but also very importantly outside our sector, to think together about how creative practice can be unlocked to make the widest possible contribution to our lives today, and how we can open up meaningful dialogue with partners across society about what engagement with creative practice and practitioners can look like and what it can lead to. This kind of discussion inevitably becomes one of articulating value, and when the value of culture and creativity is discussed, the narrative tends to follow two paths, either that of job creation and economic value or well-being and social cohesion. And we think that's not really a very helpful dichotomy. The World Economic Forum describes the breakdown of social cohesion as one of the most urgent threats to our global economy, and I think we are feeling that absolutely in our lived experience today, as the economic impact of a breakdown of trust in civil society, of public policy that engenders alienation and disconnection. It would be very naive to think that creative practice alone is the answer to that and these enormous problems, but it can be a very dynamic part of building new solutions. We're going to hear today from Emmanuel and a number of great contributors about how they've used their creative practice and creative strategies to tackle real problems and shift realities in very complex contexts. So I'm delighted to welcome all our speakers today, and I really thank them all for joining us and their generosity of being here. And I'm particularly delighted to welcome Emmanuel back to Dublin. He was here in 2016 for a project in Immer, a slightly crazy project, A Fair Land. Amazing project. Still has a lot of things came from it, some mental scars as well as some fantastic thinking and future projects. And Emmanuel was here for a short time but had a huge impact and made really strong connections, and we really want to kind of cement those and further them while he's here for a few days this week. Emmanuel is the co-founder and executive director of the Sweetwater Foundation in Chicago. And since 2014, the Sweetwater Foundation has transformed 6 blocks on the city's south side into the Commonwealth, a biodynamic campus focused on urban ecology, civic arts, and regenerative neighbourhood development. And it'll be very apparent when Emmanuel talks why we thought his voice and experience is really helpful for us to think about and hear from in Ireland today. The issues that Emmanuel is challenging and tackling in Southside Chicago are very recognisable to hear, if in a slightly different scale. He's created something of enormous hope and generosity in the Sweetwater Foundation. And you'll hear as he talks about his work that it exists in this intersection between architecture, design, planning, art, agroecology, and human development. He draws on different aspects of his creative background, sometimes working as an artist, sometimes a designer, sometimes an educator, but ultimately as a navigator of multiple bureaucracies and obstacles. And the important thing for him is to get the right answer, and a recognition that this requires the agility and collective unlocking of the imagination that's required to make meaningful change possible. So we're extremely grateful to Emmanuel for travelling over from Chicago to be with us here and for a few days in Dublin and to share a snapshot of the incredible work that he's doing. And I have great pleasure in inviting Emmanuel to the stage.
Is queued up? Is good? All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for allowing me to be here. People probably are like, why Chicago? Why Sweetwater? And hopefully this will unpack how similar we are, actually, as humans, just humanity. So, actually, I'm here today to share a story. These are familiar images probably when you look at the media of Chicago on the South Side. This is a story of a neighborhood seen as a barren wasteland, transformed into a communiversity campus. It's a sacred and safe space. This is a story of poesis, an ancient term meaning to bring into being, into a new form. It's a shared story of both personhood and place. For over 20 years, I've worked at the intersections of architecture, urban design, and urban planning, and urban ecology. My early years were shaped and guided by my mother and grandmother spending time in the garden. I was raised appreciating time, playing outdoors, and learning the value of community. As I grew older, I evolved into my textured city self growing wild. In college, I studied architecture and planning, but I felt a disconnect between the theories of the professions and my own life experiences. So I used photography as my tool for documentation exploring the ways that life comes together in cities or how it falls apart. Like the closures of public housing in cities throughout the country, the demolitions of these buildings, and the impacts made on surrounding communities in Chicago over the next decade. Photography became my way to explore the spaces in between, from the top of the Manhattan Bridge to the markets of Southern Africa, to informal housing settlements. I would meet and connect with people and spend time developing ways to unpack new theories about cities, creating models and designs informed by the processes, constructing the lens through which I see the world as a canvas for transformation. Rooted in reality and learning by doing, my work has been recognized by the Loeb and MacArthur Fellowships, Joyce and Mellon Foundations. My own personhood is directly connected to the restoring of a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. And our work is best summed up by the tagline, "There grows the neighborhood." To tell the story of regeneration, you must first understand degeneration. In ecology, degeneration is the continuous deterioration or decline of an ecosystem. In Chicago, there's an estimated 15,000 vacant properties. Most people don't know this. Surrounded by an additional 40,000 vacant lots. In the real estate market, housing or commercial development is seen as a solution to this problem. But where one lot is a market opportunity, hundreds are cause for worry, and thousands creates a crisis. But in the state's context, the roots of this problem are written into the source code of the restrictive covenants of 1936 underwriting manual that determined the value of a property or a community based on its race and class. That shaped the patterns of housing development throughout the 1940s and 50s and inspired redlining maps nationally. It determined which neighborhoods would receive mortgages and influenced the wealth and health of those communities. Like the Robert Taylor homes, 28 high-rise building would house over 28,000 people. After decades of neglect and disinvestment, they became national symbols of crime and violence and viewed as the failure of public housing. You have social housing, we have something equivalent. Demolition of the building started in the late 90s, as another parallel. Over the span of the next decade, leaving a 2-mile stretch of vacant lots that remain empty to this day. These vicious, degenerative cycles of erasure live on today. This is what I call the constructed ecology of absence that shapes society's perceptions about these cities, that communities, that they're nothing but blight, urban decay, frustrating hopes and plans. It's the same mentality in Chicago that led to the closure of 50 schools all at once, leaving buildings empty, frozen in time. There's a national debate about the so-called food deserts in these same communities. They remain closed, and like businesses still, even grocery stores, are just shells of themselves. This is not where I would shop. I would not get my food there. It limits any access to real food and vegetables. And all the real world problems of the dwindling life expectancies of people living in these neighborhoods is left unresolved. So what do we need to do to embrace real change? First, you have to unlearn what you think you know in order to learn something new, which requires a paradigm shift to embrace the different strategies of regeneration like urban acupuncture and agroecology. Regeneration is to renew, restore, or heal something to support the continuation of life. So we'll begin at the intersections of Washington Park and Inglewood, two neighborhoods with the lowest life expectancy in the city of Chicago. Here's a snapshot of a community in 2011, hollowed out. And we focus on one city block, empty, abandoned, desolate, with most of the housing in the area in decline. This neighborhood was literally written off as being doomed in the redlining maps in the 1940s with no market value, you can see. But it was once fully packed and dense. But in 1958, a school was built on this block. the Mosley School for Social Adjustment for Bad Boys, Orphans, Incorrigibles, aka the Bad Boy School, a pipeline to prison. Within 50 years, the school was closed, and the building was closed and was erased after being a temporary homeless shelter, leaving a hole in the neighborhood. According to the zoning map, in 2014, the area was coded for residential, manufacturing, and commercial use. But out of the 120 parcels in this area, 96% were vacant, with only 71% owned by the city, 19% absentee-owned, and less than 1% owner-occupied. So I realized I needed a microcode, this is a coding thing, computer hacking thing, to jumpstart things quickly so that you can reboot without rebooting the full system. So I started with the concept of blight, which in agriculture means the death and decay of a crop. I decided to hack it. So if you cross out the B, what do you get? Light. Simple hack. Shifting the mind to endless possibilities. This was my focus for urban acupuncture, a strategy using small, targeted interventions to create positive ripple effects to revitalize entire neighborhoods. So we took that one city block, the equivalent of 2 acres. In farming, you need to know how much land, and introduced the concept of community farming as the initial alchemy for regeneration. After building up a 4-foot base of organic compost across the entire city block, we focused on the seed because the source code for regeneration is in every seed. We began by cultivating the land, sharing seedlings with the community, and in farming, agroecology is a holistic approach that integrates the blend of science and indigenous knowledge systems to increase biodiversity. So from the outside, we flip the perceptions of scarcity and blight into abundance and bounty. This clicker keeps freezing on me. Rows of all types of greens, ranging from collard greens, lacinato kale, cabbage. Most people like, that's cabbage? That's really cabbage? Yeah, that's cabbage. A literal food oasis. Potatoes, tomatoes of all varieties, in all sizes, in all flavors. Countless types of peppers, from sweet to the real spice of life. It stays with you when you have the heat. Even eggplants. We also introduced flowers to transform the beauty of the place. Dahlias, zinnias, roses, and sunflowers, deepening our respect for their role in attracting pollinators that are needed to support and sustain the ecosystem's overall health. We had the chance to interact and appreciate the beauty of nature and the deep sense of interconnectedness that sustains life. This is K-Ord, the balance of chaos and order, the rhythm of life. And with this rhythm, we began the sequential poesis of building the commonwealth. We shifted to what we call the Think Do House, a formerly foreclosed house, located 1 block south of the community farm, built during the 2007 market collapse. There's a lag here. You see it? I might have to just go with this. They're way out of sync. Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna go back. This is important to stay with this, and then I'll freestyle it as we need to. So, when you sequence the development, it's not like a strand. It's that you can't just like plan it all at once. You just can't. That's not how life works. You can plan as much as you can. Life will throw you real plans. Okay, so we started with the house. Foreclosed house in Chicago, like, you know, it's boarded up, it's forgotten about. It's like lost its market value. It's 1 block south of the community farm. It was built during the 2007 global housing market collapse. The house fluctuated on the market. This is crazy. This was how it was marketed on a real estate like website. It lived like a land baron. Welcome to America. So for $500,000, it was sold. The property, a parcel, was sold for $16,500. Gouged for $500,000. That's mortgage fraud. Foreclosed for $31,000. So we're like, all right, cool. We snatched it, secured it. And after the success from the farm with the people in the neighborhood, we said, come inside. We transformed the inside of the building first. Sweat equity, paint, you know, do the real things. And then created a custom large-scale mural on the outside. People were just like, yeah, thumbs up, this is awesome. I don't know what this is, this is great. Put it on the side of the house. We opened it up, the kitchen, as a living classroom space. So we could discuss culinology, the marriage of art and science, through food and cooking, with food as medicine. And the living room became a living room, like a literally living, breathing room. A regenerative node for the neighborhood. Next was the transformation of a community garden. In the area between the house and the farm, that interstitial space, still empty, we brought in compost. It's the same formula. Designed the garden beds, but worked with local students, high school carpentry apprentices, to build the garden beds. And once the beds were put in place, we filled them with compost and seedlings, incorporating flowers for our pollinators. And the community garden was open to the public, 24/7, no fence. We then built a small greenhouse, a carpenter's greenhouse, for seed starts and season extensions, attracting other teachers and students to learn more about the art and science of life, with that time scale of life. And the garden became a regenerative node as a community hub, where the sidewalk was left unfinished in a forgotten neighborhood. We designed a custom sculptural bench to sit and reflect and talk about life, where we launched our weekly markets, celebrating the abundance of the produce. Next came the Smart Pod. This is another hack. Directly next to the house and the community garden and community farm, we secured a shipping container. Back then, everyone was like, tiny house, tiny house. We're like, no, let's do something a little bit different. We placed it by the house, created a custom staircase system, reinforced the interior, refined the designs of the system, of the structure, for the entire structure. And after a fresh coat of paint, can we switch this out? Can we switch out the clicker? We added a gallery on the ground floor, just with magnets embedded in the picture frames. And a Smart Pod was born, thanks. Brilliant. Smart Pod was born. So in that small space, we were growing over 7,000 seed starts per month, every 4 to 6 weeks, sharing both the produce and the lessons learned with the community, in sync. Next was our workshop and our pocket park. We prepared the grounds, post-hole digger, that's me, and we had to just get in there, just do the work, customize the designs, built out the structure. There's a lot of stuff you have to figure out in the field real time. And he activated the space as a place for carpentry and woodworking. a community woodworking space. We began to gather crates and pallets from around the area. So this is interesting also. There's lots of pallets and crates for every window that gets delivered throughout the city. They hire waste management in order to throw it away, to crunch it. And so we deflected wood from the landfills, partnered with carpenters in our network, teaching the tools of the trade. It's this job training thing. Cleaning up the wood, establishing systems for organization and systems management, inventory, introduced conceptual design concepts after coming to Ireland in fair land. We looked at the system. We're like, cool, this is a nice seating system, a modular design system. We reworked the designs off of pallets and crates and 2x4s, reworked the designs to be a creative space. So we designed modular furniture to transform the space into a place of wonder and imagination. That's reclaimed wood as a marionette. You look at the kids' expressions. They did not care about a person in the world other than just as puppets. We shaped the landscapes around the workshops for additional spaces for play and festivities. 2x4s, pallets turns into seating. So with that, we began making products like picture frames, planter stands, chairs, custom sculptural garden beds, transforming the aesthetics of the place, refining the designs to put out to market for sale, showcasing the potential of circular economies, not theoretically, but practically. Next was a thought barn, because you have a farm, you gotta have a barn. Located at the center of the farm, we partnered with an international woodworking guild. Builders like to travel, they'll show up, they'll be part of it. We had a woodworking guild, and we hand-raised a structure as the first timber frame barn in the city of Chicago since the Great Fire. First one. It was designed as an open pavilion, as a place to gather for humans, a place to share culture, a space for reflection, community events. We had to design the enclosure, play with lighting and acoustics, and we created a space for all seasons, a place of celebration. With the increased audience came the need for more food production. Of course, more people showing up, we got to feed more people. So we had to figure that out, like, how do we do this year-round? How do you do this in Chicago? So on the west side of the farm, we added 3 additional new hoop houses and high tunnels. So these are like traditional like fence posts, galvanized steel that you can get at box stores. And we created a custom jig, and so we figured out the system designs to figure out the parabola and the math. We created custom hoop houses designed for all seasons. It is Chicago. Spent countless hours researching thermodynamics. How do you do this? How do you do that? But we designed systems for season extension. This is in January and February in Chicago. To establish new systems for year-round food production. And with practice, repetition, and frequency over all seasons, we added sensors and monitoring systems to measure the impacts of the structures and the increased production. So next was the zombie property. That's a real term in US real estate. If it has no plan for development, it's labeled a zombie property, living dead. Located 1 block east of the farm. The house sat in limbo, deteriorating for years. This was the inside of it. So in the States, a lot of times if it's empty, it's not really empty. There's other stuff happening. So after gutting the building and securing the structure, we collected the memories and the pictures that were inside that house that would have otherwise went into a landfill. And we celebrated them by transforming the living room to an art gallery space as a space for memories and reflection, the same space. We refined the kitchen and the upstairs guest rooms, added in the solar panels, and activated the space with humans, with people for talking and reflection, like cooking demos, live streamed to our network across the country. This was during COVID. This was one of the most important moments for us, staying connected. We hosted film screenings and documentaries. We hosted birthday celebrations for our elders, and even gallery events. That's Rhonda, Mama Rhonda that's in the middle. That's her painting. She's self-taught. She's a teacher. She's incredible, but she couldn't get into a gallery because she didn't have the name brand. So directly across the street from the house, one block east, guess what? Another series of vacant lots. This is just a concentrated density of vacancy. So we said, cool, let's figure it out. Same process. Design, schematics, iterate on the design, make it real, make it practical. And after playing with fire, I like to play with fire a lot in public. There's a pun in there. So we celebrated the wood. We designed the structure as a modular system, as a kit of parts, and within a few hours, structure is assembled, hand raised, barn raising style. We activated the space, studied it throughout the seasons, figured out how to enclose it, put in our monitoring systems and designs, the same thing, same process, same iteration. And the space was ready as a community greenhouse space. A space for cooking demonstrations, art, field trips, and daily use. Most importantly, as another regenerative node for our neighborhood markets. A final example is our Civic Arts Church, located one block south of the Think Do House. It's a unique structure built around the 1900s on the verge of collapse, surrounded by another 2 acres of land. This is just a couple of blocks. After studying the materials, really analyzing and having a relationship with the building, dreaming about it, conceptually designing it, getting into 3D models and what have you, Photoshop. We partnered with local carpentry and construction crews because you have to partner with them at scale and that magnitude. But our team and our apprentices were in stride with them, learning, working side by side. And we transformed the place. And within 1 year, the Civic Arts Church was open to the public. It's a question of value sculpture that we did on the public. We get everybody's attention. Is that real? Yeah, go touch it. You ever touched a bank vault before? Yeah, go ahead. It's a barn door. It was open to all audiences of all ages, converging for gatherings, presentations, events, talks, a living, breathing museum space. You can't go to museums and touch and play, but this here you can. It's a space for civic art workshops, using nature as our source of inspiration and innovation, creating collections of community art. That's mulberries that are dyed, like as dyes that we collect. A space for music and art as a true reflection for the soul of the community that resonated throughout the neighborhood in celebration. Notice the slide door. We got trouble with the historical preservation. They're like, that's not historical preservation. I'm like, well, we'll go with our future preservation. So once we transform these lots into living, breathing structures, you had to design routines and rituals to celebrate these spaces. Like our Wellness Wednesdays. So we had to name things in order to remember and forget and remember. So every week we gather with networks to work together, harvest the bounty, prepare food inside the Think Do House, celebrating all the ranges of different cultures and traditions through the food. So we gather outside the house, circle up, see everybody eye to eye, on the furniture that we all built from reclaimed lumber, enjoying live music from musicians in residence within our network, accompanied by drinks that celebrate the fresh fruit of the season, the mint for the mojitos, topped off with beautiful, delicious desserts, followed by civic art workshops, you see the flow, in the Civic Arts Church, stitching the urban fabric. Every Friday, we have our neighborhood markets, a space that feels more like a place of reunions, a space for healing, not planned, music that turned into classes and workshops as life moves at its own rhythm. And so the Communiversity was born, the Communiversity. As a biodynamic campus for regenerative neighborhood development. So we have college students, we have high school students, we have dropouts, we have people from the neighborhood, from the block, whatever. It's all learning, it's all sharing. Spanning across 12 acres, 6 city blocks on the south side of Chicago, as a living network of regenerative nodes built upon the core set of values of public trust. So you can't help but ask, what if every city supported this type of work? It's not hard. It's actually really easy. It's a choice. Where education was rooted in action and responsibility, accountability. Today we've interfaced with countless of institutions from around the world. We're here now. And we've established a network of values-based partners. How do you say yes and how do you say no? What values do you share? Which values do we share? How do we start from that point? So it's no surprise that we have requests for partnerships from cities all throughout the country and also internationally that share similar stories of disinvestment, degeneration, and hope for regeneration. This is the poetic of our everyday. From whole to whole. The place has evolved in its own chaotic rhythm, connecting us back to our sense of humanity. Celebrating nature's gifts. Celebrating a community coming together. To grow our souls. Healing, learning, building, teaching, sharing and cultivating spaces of joy across generations in celebration of life. As places to heal and grow over time. There grows a neighborhood.
So, Emmanuel, thank you. I think that's quite the masterclass in how you bring together a collective, a community, to have a vision and not to be afraid to pursue that vision. Just showing how the different components of vision, design, connection, nature, all of those elements that actually are so important for the future of this planet, the future of this world, the future of our lives. I think you've sown so many seeds, given us so much food for thought, pardon the pun again. I'm conscious that probably in the room we have maybe 1 million questions, because that was kind of a rapid fire through what's probably a decade, 15, how many years of work in
12 in that location, but since 2008, 2009.
Yeah. So what I'll just say is we do have time for, well, we have time for a couple of questions if there's anything immediate right now. But if not, and I'll just leave that there, hanging there for a second, and I'll tell you what's going to happen next. We're going to move into, because we also have some really inspiring projects that are based in Ireland, and we wanted to do a little bit of a parallel and saying, okay, this is the amazing work that Emmanuel and his colleagues have done, probably at a scale maybe that we haven't reached in Ireland, but we do have some very inspirational projects here in Ireland also. And we also have the challenges that I think maybe Emmanuel referenced, but hasn't really kind of gone into the depth of. And that's what we're going to move into with some of the Irish presentations now. But before I introduce our next speakers, is there anyone who has a burning, compelling question? And if you don't, you have to get them for, half an hour's time,
Hi. Very impressive, Emmanuel. I have a million questions. How much was voluntary and how much was funded?
Okay, so this is the questions that we'll never be able to answer in the time that we got. So I am Black and American. I do not believe in sharecropping. Never will, never have. Everything is, sharecropping is when you exploit people for labor and money. Okay, I'm coming from a background of slavery. Not that. So I believe in production with value and respect and humanity and pay. So we got full-time staff and no debt, never taken debt. So I was like, there's no way we can answer this quickly. So with that, growing incrementally, not exceeding carrying capacity of an ecosystem because it will implode you. It will bury you. But when you do it the right pace and scale, step by step, small is beautiful. What I just showcased is the weaving of an urban fabric. You do small little things, and everything was a lesson plan. Everything was appreciated. Everything was incorporated where we have feedback and space for the community to tell us what's working, what's not. And you'll be amazed at what payback you get. So the question of volunteerism, I don't do that. No. So volunteer, yes. It's a complicated question because we have people that I interview with people and then they're like, oh, cool, volunteer staff. I'm like, what? So we believe in pay and equity. And also there's so many tiers of labor that come in when people have collective ownership. So we can pull off the impossible because we have a community that will come to support that part, right? So again, it's a perfect question because I've gotten it repeatedly since I've been here. We deal with money as it can come, and the hope that people will wake up to the reality that it's small money when you reach massive impact like that. And so we also have internships, apprenticeships, stipends, programs, volunteer things. If we have somebody who's coming regularly, I'm like, you're coming way too much. I got to find money for you. And then if we have a corporate partner, we're like, you're doing the least. You need to give more. You can come and work your ass off, right, for a second so you can understand what we go through. So, balance. I have a question for the crowd. The parallels between social housing and our public housing, to me, are uncanny. And is anybody seeing it? I'm just a pulse. Is anybody seeing any parallels? Okay, I'm just curious for later discussion. We're going to try and do a comparative analysis. Yeah.
I think you answered a lot of things about just involvement, but what about just raising the money? You seem very powerful and influential. So, and there's that, and also you must have a lot of influence in the city. How did you even take over these places and do this?
Gia, you want to answer that? Hold on a second. This is for the recording.
I would say I would say
you should
share.
My wife. Gia is and my daughter right here. So. This is
Gia Naima. There's something to be said for flying under the radar. And I would say that the politics run deep in Chicago. We're renowned for the politics in Chicago.
Worldwide.
Worldwide, like the Windy City, if you've heard of it. But there,
But hold on, do y'all understand the Windy City is known not for the wind, it's for the winds of change of politics?
yeah,
That's actually why it's called Windy City.
the blowing of wind of politicians
Yeah.
from the. I would say that we have been extremely strategic in the small is beautiful approach, the incremental approach, and being smart with how you take every single step over time so that you are only receiving and seeking funding that is aligned with your values. And there are many opportunities to take money that comes with strings that is aligned with individuals and programs that do not reach our values. So I don't know how to say it other than
That's
how
it.
Mayo said. Like,
That was great. That's a diplomatic. I can do less.
yeah.
So we've had people that we started off in trust and partnership with the city, and that was how we got our start. That was cool. And then all of a sudden they were like, wait, technically, I don't know what's legal and what's not. We're like, we know. So do you believe in us or not? And then they said, yeah, but technically you kind of just have to do what you do. And it's interesting when somebody asked me, what's the nature of the relationship? I'm like, what relationship? A relationship is two-part. It's a presence where you're constantly having an interaction. So fundamentally, we started off with a solid relationship, and we still hold a relationship of some sort. It's like a third distant cousin at some point. But we're there. After a while, the things that we were trying to do, there was no legal parameters to do that. So we had to do it to prove point of reference. And the city said, do it as a community educational farm space. Cool. Had to write the permits, had to write the zoning codes. We had to rewrite stuff with the city at the early stages, and after a period of being very successful and completely not understood, we became distant. We have not had a mayor visit. We have a local politician who's like super supportive, but she's drowning in all types of other stuff. So she was like, I trust y'all, go do what you do. Speaks for itself. So we started off with like a very lock and stride relationship, and then it turns into something that becomes whatever it is, and then it's like an awareness. So when the city needs a good story, we're there. We share. It's all good. But it has inhibited, it's the glass ceiling that has inhibited our housing plan. And I can't talk about that one.
Okay, well, Emmanuel, cool. Thank you again. I'm going to leave it there, only not to steal time off our other speakers. I'm delighted now to welcome to the stage Dr. Fiona Whelan, who's an artist lecturer with NCAD, and Gillian O'Connor, who is a community worker with the Rialto Youth Project. Gillian has over 20 years of experience working alongside young people within their communities, and Fiona is an eminent writer, artist and programme leader of the MFA and MA in Art and Social Action in NCAD. And she has spent a lot of time exploring and responding to power relations and inequalities in long-term collaborations with a diverse array of individuals, groups and organisations. So, Fiona and Gillian, I'm going to hand over to yourselves.
In an age of inequality, where working class communities are oppressed, the Rialto Youth Project is working towards bringing about social change, providing an integrated youth service based on the needs of young people, and in particular those most at risk. This is the mission statement of Rialto Youth Project for the last 30 years. Rialto Youth Project, where I work as a youth worker, is based in Rialto, a village in the southwest inner city with a population of approximately 5,000. It has always been an area with a mix of social and private housing. Rialto Youth Project is a community youth project, which was established in 1981. This was in response to a significant group of local young people whose needs were not being met. The community were having to cope with a poverty crisis, drugs epidemic, and record unemployment figures for young people. Rialto Youth Project has always held a very distinct position in naming working class young people and the systematic oppression they, their families and their communities were experiencing. And from the beginning, Rialto Youth Project understood the role that arts and culture could play in the exploration, voice and challenge to the state in relation to this. Rialto Youth Project works from a critical social education model of youth work, working towards radical social change. This encapsulates a whole spectrum of young people's lives from education, health, well-being, community and employment. One of the key pillars in the vision of the project is the belief in the transformative power of art and creativity as a way of working with young people. The project has held a long tradition and a strong commitment to arts and cultural practice as a means of creative expression across a range of forms, including visual arts, theatre, music, dance and street performance. In our approach to arts and youth work, we think of clear pathways of progression. The arts as play, the arts as personal and social development, and the arts as profession or career. Our arts programme has 4 core developmental strands that have included storytelling as the key device to nurture the creative imagination of children between 5 and 8 years, and structured age-related arts programmes that have developmental strands and offer clear progression for young people from childhood into early adulthood and beyond. Rialto Youth Project is ever-changing and values its capacity to evolve with fluidity that keeps it responsive to the changing environment of youth work. As an organisation, we continue to develop practice as we encounter and support creative, social and educational challenges for all children and young people. We believe in the potential of arts and youth work to challenge and make long-term commitment to challenge unjust social conditions through engagement with the politics of change.
So I've worked as an artist in collaboration with Rialto Youth Project for 2 decades, and I've always been drawn to their refusal to use the depoliticised language of disadvantage, instead favouring the more defiant language as they articulate in the mission statement, the oppression and marginalisation of working class communities. That recognition of systemic inequality and a commitment to analyse and engage with power relations has been at the core value of our collaborative work as Artist and Youth Project. This commitment to exploring power, for me, can be seen as an alternative ethical framework to the contemporary ethics of social inclusion, which doesn't always attend to the power structures that people are being included into or the power relations that preside over that inclusion. So, as we strive for more inclusive societies, as laid out in the overview of this event, we must also be careful not to render invisible the systemic power relations that are at the root cause of inequality and exclusion. So our collaborative practice as Artist and Youth Project has engaged staff, young people, their families and wider communities in a series of transgenerational projects to critically examine and respond to power relations at a personal, community and societal level. Each project has developed through slow inquiry based on the lived experiences of those involved, which later manifest through a series of artworks where inequality is de-individualised through collectivising lived experience and exposing identified power relations. The themes, the form of the emerging work, the locations and the publics are all established organically through the collaborative process. These projects include the Policing Dialogues project from 2007 to 11, led by a collective of young people, youth workers and artists, which began as a creative exploration of power, exploring power both in the collaborative relationships of the collective but also in the lived experiences of all involved. And this led to a 4-year iterative project which became focused on neighbourhood relations of power and policing, which brought together young people, youth workers, educators, academics and members of An Garda Síochána, our Irish police force. Centred on young people's lived experiences of policing, we created dialogical events, encounters, films, publications, exhibitions and, importantly, recommendations for police training. A subsequent project, Natural History of Hope, from 2012 to 2016, saw techniques for engagement and public presentation extend beyond the visible forms of power, such as policing, to engage with more invisible and intangible forms of power experienced as social norms. Natural History of Hope was a 4-year intergenerational inquiry exploring contemporary equality issues for women and girls living and working in Rialto Youth Project living and working in Rialto, through story sharing, listening events, dialogues and performance, which produced a visual lexicon for multiple systemic power relations that were identified by the many women and girls involved. In 2018, the What Does He Need project began picking up on some of the questions that emerged in Natural History of Hope and set out to explore how men and boys are shaped by and influence the world they live in. This multi-layered project is a collaboration between Rialto Youth Project, myself and Broken Talkers, and has developed an association with a Dublin City network of individuals and organisations in the area of arts, culture, youth work, community development and education. The project aims to create a significant public dialogue about the current state of masculinity. Our devices of story gathering have evolved here in this project to include the co-creation of fictitious characters who serve to de-individualise and anonymise complex lived experience, along with other audio, textual, visual, pedagogical and performative public outputs, positioning diverse voices in conversation with one another. From the early days of policing dialogues, where young people identified a desire to be listened to by the police, the attention on listening has remained a constant focus in our methodology, as each process considers what is to be said, how will we say it, who needs to listen, and how do we create the conditions for listening. One strand of the What Does He Need project that we are currently working on is called Boys in the Making, that has been running since 2019. What began as an approach to working with one group of young men in Rialto Youth Project has now been articulated as a repeatable methodology and piloted across Dublin City and more recently in the UK, in schools and youth projects and other community organisations with a growing team of artists and educators. Through new partnerships with Heart of Glass and supported by Create Ireland, we are working to identify and develop an infrastructure to sustain, grow and support the further expansion of this programme. And in an arts funding landscape where the new and the innovative is constantly prioritised, this feels important territory to be in so that the knowledge and methodology that are generated in long-term community-based transdisciplinary projects can be recognised and harnessed. So we'll now just tell you a little bit more about this current programme.
He is a boy, he is from here, you are responsible for him. This is the first prompt in the Boys in the Making programme, which involves the creation of a boy. He is created by a group of boys and or young men. They take responsibility for naming their boy and guiding him through life. The Boys in the Making programme is always facilitated by a youth worker or educator and an artist who develop creative and conversational approaches to listen and tap into the knowledge of the young men involved. The young men bring their own lived experiences and observations to the life of the character that they create. This process takes place in private over many months, and the group explore how their character interacts with the world and how that shapes his experience and opinions. All the details of the boy's life are negotiated. How he looks, what his home life is like, what he's interested in, his friendship and his communities. The group identifies the experiences and challenges that the boy faces. Through supported conversations, unpacking ideas, observations and thoughts, the process supports the group to consider why the boy's life is the way that it is. It creates space for conversations around complex themes like structural power and the boy's position within that, and the impact that that then has on his life. As neoliberalism constantly tries to individualise youth work, pushing towards more one-to-one personal development type work, which positions issues with individuals, our mission has always been about holding the collective experience and highlighting and challenging structural inequality. I am currently working with an artist and a group of boys aged 9 to 11 years from one of our community-based after schools in Rialto Youth Project. They have created a boy called Big Boy Vincent, who's about this high. And we've been working together over the last number of years, exploring Vincent's life through conversation, games, drawing and comic making. As youth worker and artist, we have identified how masculinity intersects with other themes, including class, race and sexuality. One core process of Boys in the Making is about creating spaces where the boys are heard, where conversations that are very challenging can exist, be minded, and the nuances unpacked. Also, where the real lived experiences of the boys can be brought to a space that feels safe. We spend time nurturing the care of the boys and the boy that they have created. The Boys in the Making project identifies a number of phases in its methodology, and we are currently entering phase 2. This means we are moving from the private to a public. The group have identified the parts of the story that they would like to share with the public, and we're happy to move into phase 2. As a group, we've agreed an art form to bring the story to life, and we will now be creating an animation based on Big Boy Vincent's life, and we'll showcase this to our public in time. We've created the conditions to deeply listen to the boys, and are now considering in turn who needs to listen to their experiences. The process of doing this takes time, care, and careful consideration. Every step is worked collaboratively as youth worker, artist, and the boys. We are always checking in to see how the group is and their understanding of next steps. We are listening and checking back. This is critical in the process. What happens in Boys in the Making is a collective process of care, a group caring. There are private moments within the group. There are public moments that are really carefully minded and considered for everyone involved. Themes of masculinity can be explored through creativity and play. We have watched boys care for the characters that they have created. We've made wooden boys, and the young men have made them combs and aftershave to groom and care for them. They've acted out drama scenes with the boys, and they've sat together and reflected on their personal and shared experiences of masculinity. The boys have responsibility for the boy. They're making decisions together in his best interest and prioritising his needs.
In Boys in the Making, the fictional nature of each group's character is important so he can operate anonymously, embodying a number of contrasting experiences born of the conversational exchange that created him. A group will steer their boy based on what they know to be his choices within the reality in which he is situated, arguing for certain futures for the boy that they've now named and dressed and sculpted a life for and sent out into the world, considering his needs, what he needs to do, where he needs to find agency and respect, and in the words of the first group, how he can be a somebody. Each group also explores how the world is and how it could be, imagining alternative worlds for the boy for whom they're now responsible. This imaginative process creates the potential for conversations to move between the socially scripted reality that the group perceive for the boy and the potential to be found in the imaginary space of creating new worlds and new realities. Importantly, the character that the group creates is not fixed. Like the boys who create him and the rest of us, he's not a single story, but full of complexity. He'll grow and change his opinions many times. And what's important for Boys in the Making as a programme is that it's always situated in community organisations or schools where the young people have a relationship, so characters can be returned to and new experiences can be generated into the future. As Gillian mentioned, at a certain point in the process, attention is turned towards the public. What story is it that the boys want to tell, and who needs to hear it? The second phase of the programme methodology, called Public Address, sees this team move out of the enclosed conversations of phase 1 to work on the development of an artwork that delves into some aspect of the character's story that the boys want to share publicly. And much like the themes not being prescribed in the first phase, the art form is also emergent in Boys in the Making, born of the process, the ideas, the skills, the interests of the organisation, the group and the artist. While Boys in the Making is explicitly pedagogical, it's important for us that this is not a one-directional education process, an assumption that is often made when working with young people. In this process, each group considers who else needs to listen to what this boy has to say, and following a careful phased process supporting the transition from private to public, these artworks carry the insights of a group of boys or young men into the world, which prompt a further dialogue with identified publics. In January 2025 at NCAD Gallery, myself and Rialto U Project presented an exhibition focused on the first 19 boys that have been created by children and young people from aged 5 to 18 in multiple contexts across Dublin, where Boys in the Making is being developed. For 1 month, these life-size characters stood shoulder to shoulder facing those who entered the space or walked by the large gallery window. Their constant presence was amplified by a range of artworks created by the different groups, including animations and films, posters, drawings, poetry, and a graphic novel, bringing insights from their collectively constructed lives. While many of the individual artworks had already been presented publicly in response to a group's own identification of the publics they wished to engage, this collective exhibition was rooted in the commitments of Phase 3 of the methodology, public conversations. Taking the themes and insights generated in the process and artworks from all the boys and young men engaged in Boys in the Making across the city to support a public conversation in response. This included a regular philosophy space for adult and young men, which was a very special, quite unique space, responding to the themes emerging from the young people's artworks. We also programmed workshops led by academics and masculinities, workshops led by youth workers, school visits, events, and all culminating in a one-day conference. A bespoke seating structure was created central to the exhibition to host this month-long programme, bringing young men and their knowledge and insights into conversation with each other and wider discourses. So maybe just as a final point to conclude, myself and colleagues in Rialto U Project are committed to sharing our artistic and youth work methodologies as a form of movement building, to quote our dear friend and supporter Alva Murphy. At a time where the work we all do is increasingly subject to predetermined timelines and prescribed outcomes, there is really a risk that practices are tamed and standardised, and invitations to community groups to engage in civic society are over-individualised and over-determined. So for us, it feels very important to fight for long-term, emergent, collaborative, open-ended and imaginative practice that doesn't know what it will be when it sets out and values the transdisciplinary potential of collaborative arts and youth work methodologies to engage with and respond to themes of power and inequality. Thank you.
Fiona, Gillian, thank you so much. It was so great for me to see the developmental process over time, where one project informed the next, that kind of iterative process. But I suppose just to say, and I saw the exhibition in the NCAD gallery back in 2025, and actually hearing the stories and the testimonies of those created boys were so powerful. And it just brings to mind, I mean, what we tend to be missing in our societies these days is that movement, those rites of passage that, you know, bring children into boyhood, into adolescence, into manhood. And it's so critically important to have that space, to have those conversations, to understand the dynamics of power, because actually the power that we've been shown in this world today is so far off balance. You know, we need to have a different understanding of how boys become men and how those men hold power and agency and what that value brings to them and to society. So it's just really, really such critical work. I'm not aware, and I might be speaking incorrectly, but I think it's one of the very few projects that combines youth work, creativity over decades. I think there's very, very few examples of that in Ireland, and I think really part of why we're here today is to explore how we can support and engender more of that. So thank you so much. So our next presenter is Dr. Philip Crowe. He joins us as the Director of Research in UCD's School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy. But Philip is also a co-director of an initiative that I actually wasn't too aware of until we had a conversation, which is the UCD Centre for the Irish Towns First initiative. And it's a transdisciplinary centre for research, collaboration, and it brings together a range of stakeholders around the idea of how can we become more innovative in our revitalisation of Irish towns, and why is that important. So I'm going to invite Philip to share some of the projects and engagements that he has undertaken, and I'll hand the stage to you.
Okay, thank you, Louise, and thank you for the invitation to be part of the conversation today. I thought I'd take the opportunity of this meeting to introduce you to one funded project that we've been involved in on a very much shorter timeline than the previous two projects. I hope there's a slide with the... Yes, so the title of this presentation is Connecting Communities to Climate Change Down the Historic Laneways of an Irish Town. Now, the historic laneways of an Irish town might sound like a slightly odd place to try and connect people with climate change, but I hope by the end of this presentation that might make some sense. So just to start, why a centre for Irish towns? Well, first thing to say is that we are a very small centre for research and training in UCD, but we try to be all Ireland, all island actually. But the reason for a Centre for Irish Towns is that Ireland is a nation of towns. So very approximately a third of us live in cities, a third of us live in something that would be described as a town, and a third of us live in a rural environment. So that means about 2/3 of the population are at least reliant on a town, and they tend to be sidelined or ignored, certainly in research and in policy. The majority of Irish towns are in decline, unfortunately. I'm sure there's many people who are connected with different Irish towns in the audience. They face all sorts of challenges, environmental challenges, economic challenges, social challenges, but they play this absolutely critical role, obviously, in the cultural, social and economic life of the nation. And we say that they are at a convergence point for a broad range of social ecological systems. So that could be anything from decarbonisation, climate adaptation, and building sustainable communities. They're also endlessly fascinating, which I hope you could see from that aerial image of a very modest small town in County Monaghan, Castleblaney. We're also at a really critical moment of change in Irish towns in terms of policy and research. So for the first time, we have a policy, or at least we have a policy approach. I'm not quite sure of the nuances of that, for Irish towns, called the Town Centre First policy approach. And that's acted in recent years as a catalyst for a whole range of town plans that have been put together, which are basically vision plans for towns. And these have been carried out in various different ways. So in the Centre for Irish Towns, we respond to this context. We're a transdisciplinary centre, as Louise has said. And by transdisciplinary, I mean that we try and get all different sectors involved and all different disciplines. So whilst we are hosted, we have to be hosted by a school in UCD. So we're hosted in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy, but we very much realise that you're not going to address the challenges of towns by solely talking to architects. And no offence to architects, and I'm allowed to say that as I trained as one. What we're trying to do is to bring together and create research, funded research projects relating to towns on the island of Ireland. We're trying to facilitate a discourse on towns, and we do that mainly through a webinar series called Talking Towns, and you're very welcome to join us on the 24th of April, I think is our next one, and it's on Irish urban attitudes. And then we also obviously try and bring towns into the curriculum through coursework and lecture content. And the valuable thing there about towns is they're often of a manageable scale in which to explore challenges, where we can work with communities and we can test innovations. So today, I'm going to talk about the Cascade project, which is a lot to do with water. And it's an example of what we get funding for, in this case, from the Creative Ireland's Climate Action Fund 2. And it explores a number of ideas. So it explores ideas from the past. I very often refer to Patrick Geddes, whose dates are 1854 to 1932. He's often seen as a founding father of urban conservation. And he noted that we needed to bring everyone along in the processes of change. He was responding to the industrial city at that time. And to do this, everyone needs to understand to some degree what are the challenges, why is this change needed? And he was very keen on doing this through activities and particularly mapping. And there's lots of parallels to more contemporary discourses like the knowledge action gap, in terms of climate action, which is where you have somebody like myself, and I'm sure everyone in this room who knows an awful lot about climate change and the dangers of climate change, the threats of it, and what's going on at the moment, and yet there's this gap between what we know and what we actually do. The project also explores different discourses such as community resilience, which emphasises the import of things like social memory and social learning, a sense of belonging and attachment to place, and using our imaginations. And obviously the previous two presentations have been showing that extremely well. So just to get to the actual project, there are two things to say about the project. I didn't mean to put up an entire picture of the team, and it's a very unusual thing to do. I don't normally put up a picture of the team and embarrass everyone, but I just wanted to make the point that it's very much a transdisciplinary team. So we have a number of academics. There are 3 academics in the team. A water engineer, which is Sarah, who's 4th from the left, who led the project, and then 2 architects, myself and Orla Murphy. There's a local councillor in there. There's an artist, Rina Ninel, she's 4 from the right, and there's also a local architecture practice. And of course, none of these people obediently stay within their assigned silos. So, for example, Sarah is a water engineer, but she's also a super painter, and she runs a landscape design practice on the side. I don't know how she does it. And then the artist, Rina Ninel, could take over lecturing climate science, no problem in UCD. The other really important thing is that this project is very place-based. It's in Ballina, County Mayo, and Ballina has a very active community group called Ballina Greenest Town. And that's their ambition, is to become Ireland's greenest town. And we've been working with them over the past 5 or 6 years, layering up projects in this one place. And Ballina is interesting because it's literally shaped by water, physically, socially, culturally, and ecologically. And when you're there, and I know there are some people from County Mayo in the audience, when you're there, water is coming at you from all angles. It's at the centre of the most magnificent watershed for the River Moy, which is in the picture. It's an incredibly powerful, actually terrifying river to walk over or to walk alongside. And it's at this interesting intersection between riverine and marine ecosystems, and where salmon literally burst out of the water, or at least they used to. So the Cascade project has 2 starting points. The first is that many of the impacts of climate change in Ireland are watery. They're linked with water in some way. And basically that's to do with greater rainfall and critically greater rainfall intensity, the amount of water landing in a certain area over a certain period of time, and then less in the summers. The second starting point is that the laneways in our heritage towns and cities that are a key part of the urban morphology are often in a really poor state of repair. And actually this is often due to lack of maintenance, and in particular the poor state of repair of rainwater goods. And by rainwater goods, they simply mean gutters and downpipes and drains, etc. So the basic idea of this project was that we can start to engage citizens with climate change by exploring one aspect, water, at a local and tangible scale in places they inhabit or experience daily. And in this case, that's the laneways. And we would do this through a creative, engaged, and activity-based approach. So there are 3 main stages to this project, to try and keep a structure to it. So the first one is co-production of knowledge, the second one was a co-design phase, and the third one was a co-making phase. So this first phase, the co-production of knowledge stage, was basically recognizing that local people know their place and systems best. And there were 3 main activities. On the screen, you've got images of the laneway tours. So these were basically walking conversations about Ballina's lanes, drains, and water mains, and introduced people to where water comes from, where water is going, and how it shapes the way we use our towns. And I believe I wasn't on this, but the highlight of this was Aldi's new surface water attenuation system, which I think is largely underneath the car park. We also obviously had a lot of workshops, and that's a common theme in this project. So the first part of this was to do storytelling, using storytelling techniques to gather stories and concerns about water and the laneways. And then the second part involved very close observation, where we invited participants to survey and to observe how water literally cascades down the walls of these buildings. It forms puddles, it soaks into surrounding materials, and creates this perfect habitat for ferns and moss. And this resulted in a number of pencil drawings that Orla Murphy, my fellow co-director of the Centre for Artscience, created from these surveys. And then we reflected all of this information back in what we called laneway galleries. And this was to show the community what they had told us. And then we also put up a number of panels that showed ideas, basically, of contemporary water management case studies. And we coincided all of this with Heritage Week, so there was a sort of momentum in the town already. So the second phase then was co-design. And this was to put together a long list of ideas that responded to the issues that had been raised in the co-production of knowledge stage. And it again involved a number of workshops and a presence at various established events. So the first workshop was a session with local decision makers. So we have a director of services from Mayo County Council, several of the councillors present, and we held this in one of the lanes in a sort of open session, and we combined that with live music, and there was a graffiti workshop. And then we had another workshop working with schools, transition year students, always good for getting involved in a workshop, and also with different stakeholders in the town, trying to generate this long list of ideas. And then there was a third workshop which then started to develop those ideas, looking at what we could prioritise. And we talked to school kids in the morning, and then we talked to local authority staff and other stakeholders in the afternoon. And they assessed the feasibility of the ideas in terms of maintenance and integration into the existing laneway network. And I've got a couple of images of those workshops, which took place in the Mary Robinson Centre in the town. And the long list of ideas was then translated into a series of very simple sketches, and then they were voted on at various events around the town over a period of time, and then also online. And they included simple things like an urban pocket forest, the use of rain chains to make noises, a sensory experience with the rain, or diverting rain into rain gardens, or to create a watery bowl for dogs, etc. And then we took the project into the third phase, which was a co-making phase. And there were two key outputs in this. The first was a transformed laneway, a sort of tactical urbanism demonstration of what is possible. And then the second output was a negotiated plan that offers a shared vision of the future transformation of the laneways. So just to go to the first output, so we took this tactical urbanism approach to a lane called O'Hora's Lane. And we translated a number of the co-designed ideas from the long list into a coordinated set of interventions, working in close liaison, obviously, with the local council and property owners adjoining the lane and specialist consultants. And the works were basically, we cleaned and painted the walls. There was a lot of deliberation about what colour. We installed a green wall, quite different to the green wall that's outside the window, if people can see it there. This one has got something like 600 plants in it, and it stores a lot of water. I can't remember the amount of litres of water that it is slowing down going into the drainage system. And we installed rainwater planters that gather the rainwater, slow it down, but also invite interaction through seats and a pet bowl, etc. We replaced gutters and downpipes that were not working, an awful lot of them weren't. And we installed an artwork that Rhiannoch designed. We found out that O'Hora's Lane commemorates an Irish freedom fighter called Ida O'Hora. Nobody in the town knew about this except for this one local historian. So this was quite unexpected. And anyway, we basically put these interventions into the lane, and they've been there for a number of months now. And the second output then was the negotiated plan. And that brought together the ideas and findings from the project into a shared vision for transforming the town's laneways into vibrant, inclusive and climate-resilient public spaces. And the idea was that this could inform future funding and delivery. And we launched that. We launched the transformed laneway and then also displayed the negotiated plan in an exhibition in the town centre. And we gathered feedback via questionnaire and semi-structured interviews with key stakeholders in order to try and understand what might have been the effect of the project. And there's a whole report of findings, but the things that did come up repeatedly, where the transformation of the lane, the sort of the tactical urbanism side of it, was really critical for a lot of people in shifting their perceptions of these spaces. So maybe tactical urbanism can be quite a powerful tool. It also came up a lot that the project deepened people's understandings of complex climate issues. So by understanding something in a very local sense, they were able to use systems thinking to understand it in a global sense. So the storytelling and the engagement in creative activities did seem to have an effect for the respondents. They also said that they were applying what they learned to other projects, conversations, and even their own homes and gardens. So maybe the project was able to build capacity and confidence to some degree. And then across interviews and feedback, participants repeatedly emphasized the importance of hope. And it appears that the project inspired people to believe that a positive transformation is possible, even at this very small scale, in their own communities. So I hope this made some sense. I suppose for us, the biggest challenge is the helicopter aspect of projects like this, which is inevitably what we do, by the nature of the funding that we get, where we land into a place for a limited period and then generate activity only to disappear again. Now, Ballina is slightly different for us because most of that team that we were working with, live in Ballina or near to it. I'm actually the only one over in Dublin. We do try to counter this helicopter aspect by layering multiple projects in the one place. So that's what's happened in Ballina. And making an effort to integrate the local authority and other key stakeholders into the process. And so in this type of project, we're exploring with local stakeholders maybe how things could be done differently, in this case relating to community engagement with climate change and public space upgrades for climate adaptation. And I guess our hope is that some aspects of this do get adopted into practice. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Philip. Again, I think everyone certainly lives on the southeast of Ireland is very aware of the power of water. I think we have a yellow rain warning in place today, and actually it's probably the south and northwest of the country that actually bears the brunt of most of the rain and flooding historically. I think what's really interesting about all of the presentations so far is it's almost like they're peeling back the layers to reveal something that has always existed, but that actually we rarely pay attention to. I was struck by the images of the kind of decrepit, crumbling gutters and doorways that we walk past probably on every laneway, and then how you can apply that kind of collective design approach to build something beautiful within a community, and also to build that kind of understanding of why water is important, how we might harness it, and that idea of kind of the laneways being the lungs of the community, being kind of this just really powerful visualization. And also, I suppose, just to say, I think everybody is aware that our towns are in crisis. I mean, certainly post-COVID, the type of engagement we had with our local grocery stores, our local pubs, our local markets, all of that did start to go into decline, because actually we had a reset in our psychology as to how we socialise, how we engage. Now, hopefully markets did benefit, certainly during the COVID time, but I was actually speaking to market holders recently who said during COVID their take home of a weekend was about €6,000, and now it's about £1,000. Yeah, so, it just, I suppose sometimes we're not as conscious as we need to be of the choices that we are making in our daily lives that are going to kind of help to rebuild that collective agency of communities and towns. So thank you, Philip, for sharing that. So next, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Jessica Foley, who is, a poet and lecturer at IADT. She's based in Offaly, in the Midlands, in Birr. Well, in Birr. Is it in Birr that you're based? No. You're from Birr. Right. But her practice is really interesting because it's concerned with how the personal and social voice can be developed through critical engagement using writing as a process. And I know when I invited Jessica to do this talk, we had really interesting conversations about this idea of engineering fictions and about the kind of different voices that different sectors use, or the different languages that they use, and how that creates, I suppose, a siloization between different disciplines, and maybe ways and strategies that you've come to look at how we can break those down. So you're welcome, Jessica.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Louise and CFA, for inviting me. I actually wasn't quite sure what to present today, so I decided to speak from the near present in my role as teacher and poet working at the Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Dunleary, South County, Dublin. So I'd like to seed this short talk with 2 quotes that I hope you can keep in mind, and also I encourage you to take notes. The first is by writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, who claims that, quote, art creates the possible of politics, end quote. The second was spoken by curator Annie Fletcher, now director of Irish Museum of Modern Art, many years ago at an event in Limerick City Gallery. I was in the audience taking notes and took in her provocation, which was, if we can't listen to what we don't want to hear, what hope do we have? This provocation has stayed with me for close to 2 decades. It's a provocation that is changing with me over time, as I wonder at how and where art creates the possible of politics. Now, in my mind, Fletcher's provocation sounds like this. If we can't listen to what we don't want to hear, if we can't hear what we don't understand, what kind of politics can we have? In 2024, I began a new module in IADT. It's one of many elective modules available to second-year students across a multitude of courses from art, psychology, creative computing, animation, design for film, and so on. The broad purpose of these electives is to give students a chance to, quote, study outside of their normal discipline, end quote, and to encounter, quote, a range of practices, themes, ideas, creative and critical approaches which are new to them, end quote. It's also a chance for teaching staff and students to meet each other and become exposed to the many different ways of knowing and communicating that are happening within the institution. The module I run is called Curious Bodies. I don't know if I should move this on. I have a slide. Anyway, when I ask my students what they think the title of the module might mean, they often shake their heads. And I say, I'm not entirely sure either. But I say it's a 2-word poem. I write a lot of these, engineering fictions is one of them, and they usually become frameworks for making, reflection, and conversation. So it's an elective as poem. And we are writing it together as we go along. I wonder out loud, under what conditions is it safe to be curious? I wonder out loud, how can we prepare for the risk of learning through art? And throughout the module I ask, what are we learning? I tell my students that Curious Bodies is an elective to support you in listening to your own voice through encounters and experience with art in context, through generative experiments with observation and expanded forms of writing, from written word to moving image. I explain that the main action of the module involves field trips to art in context, whether it be an artist-run gallery or an arts centre or a museum or a public street or a field or a commercial building or a research institute. Along the way, we might meet with artists and curators, and then we begin a non-linear process of observation and response, conversation and making. I tell the students that throughout the module, I want to enlarge our understanding of writing as a practice that can be playful and descriptive, that can support imagination, analysis, translation and transformation. And I quote the scholar Deborah Brand, who writes in her book, The Rise of Writing, quote, when writing is treated in all of its fullness, it engages ethics and a sense of risk and responsibility. It becomes consequential, dramatic, dangerous, demanding, rewarding, and capable of changing self and others. I want those who engage with Curious Bodies to feel how art and writing can be powerful ways of making meaning, critiquing culture, and forming community. I want those who engage with Curious Bodies to understand that what they are expected to make is a relationship with their own voice. We work with three main techniques over the duration of the module. I draw upon the theory of free writing as articulated, the three techniques: free writing, slow looking, and ekphrasis. So I draw upon the theory of free writing as articulated by Peter Elbow, who says, quote, "The main thing about free writing is that it is non-editing. It is an exercise in bringing together the process of producing words and putting them down on a page. Practiced regularly, it undoes the ingrained habit of editing at the same time you are trying to produce. It will make writing less blocked because words come more easily." End quote. The prioritization of the editor is a symptom of fear, a fear of failure. And the trouble with feeding this fear, as Peter Elbow explains, is that, quote, "the habit of compulsive premature editing doesn't just make writing hard, it also makes writing dead." End quote. The effect of this is that, as Elbow puts it, quote, "your voice is damped out by all the interruptions, changes, and hesitations between the consciousness and the page." End quote. I explained to students that free writing is a technique that can unsettle cliches of failure, the fear of not being clear, of not making sense, of transmitting a clear message from A to B, of not being heard or seen or believed, or not being legible. Free writing suspends the editor and ushers you into the failure club, as a former engineering colleague of mine called it. This is a porous place where denizens of defeat, disarray, and disaster of various intensities can admit to their own roughshod processes of making sense, of making meaning, of making knowledge, of deciding value. And in the process of this practice of free writing, something marvelous can emerge. The pattern of your own voice singing into and along with or against the world. Free writing as a regular practice can lead you to hear your own voice and in turn to sense your own power. As Peter Elbow says, "In your own natural way of producing words, there is a sound, a texture, a rhythm, a voice, which is the main source of your power in your writing. I don't know how it works, but this voice is the force that will make a reader listen to you. Maybe you don't like your voice. Maybe people have made fun of it, but it's the only voice you've got. It's your only source of power." This is quite the provocation. It reminds me of that critical tension, the critical and creative tension of meaning between the literal and the metaphorical when they overlap. Voice, in this case, is a literal metaphor. It dances in a crack between a speaking entity and a soul in flight. Slowness, likewise, is an idea that can function at once metaphorically and literally. And like curiosity, it is a term that is etched in the glossary of neoliberalism's political playbook. As academic Lutz Kupnick, for example, critiques the appreciation of slowness as an expression of, quote, "the needs of those privileged to afford more wholesome ways of life, precisely because they secretly or not so secretly profit from fast and thriving economies," end quote. Within Curious Bodies, slowness is used as a technique to support observation and being with art in the world. It frames a mode of engagement that invites people to look again and to become aware of time. As Shari Tishman explains, slow-looking techniques, quote, "encourage people to make their own discerning perceptions rather than to corroborate what experts tell them they should see. This is more than a motivational nicety. When people look slowly at things for themselves, they tend to grasp complexities and make connections in a way that no amount of expert information can convey. This is one of the reasons that slow looking is a unique mode of learning," end quote. Ekphrasis then is perhaps the least familiar word for students. Janae Bauer describes it as, quote, "a type of play that provides a framework for the imagination," end quote. Broken into two parts, the ek and the phrasein, helps to translate the word as a way of speaking or telling outwards, and it's traditionally understood in relation to artworks, traditionally a form of response to an artwork that is translated into words. But in Curious Bodies, I invite students to transpose some of that experience into experimental video form as a moving image sentence. The key thing I'm looking for in their process and practice is voice. I want to get a sense of them listening and speaking through the art they've encountered, yes, but just as much through the world they inhabit every day. The hidden curriculum of Curious Bodies is an effort to counter prevailing yet underappreciated and complex conditions of what philosopher Miranda Fricker calls epistemic injustice. That is, the experience of not being credited or believed inwardly or outwardly. The moving image sentence offered students an ekphrastic moment to convey their knowledge or experience to others by telling, and to make sense of their own social and political experiences. Students are encouraged to push past the forms of story they expect themselves to tell, stories of heroes and domination, linearity, triumph, resolution, or complicitous consumer culture, into stories that try instead to draw upon a carrier bag theory of fiction. This is where, as Ursula K. Le Guin shows us, story makers, quote, describe what is in fact going on, what people actually do and feel, how people relate to everything else in this vast sack, this belly of the universe, this womb of things to be and tomb of things that were, this unending story, end quote. It is a strange realism, she says, but it is a strange reality. The reason I chose to speak about Curious Bodies today is because of a word that was mentioned in our preparatory conversations for this event. Gia mentioned the word phenology, and my impression is that this is a core part of Sweetwater Foundation's methodology. Phenology involves an attentiveness towards cycles, in particular cycles of animals and plants, and how they are influenced by seasonal and interannual variations in climate. Phenology is now an important tool in observing the realities of climate change. For example, Met Éireann and the National Weather Forecaster in Ireland have observed that all species except birch in our gardens now leaf earlier than in 1970. Phenology traditionally functions as a methodical practice of observation and recording, but it has a metaphorical resonance that prompts the question, what if? What if we imagined phenology as an expanded ecological practice that informs how we attend to myriad other relations, social, political, economic, intellectual, spiritual, and so on? What if we recognized phenology as a form of slow looking, one that can inform how we write our ways into the present and the future? What if we embraced the fact that different ways of looking and attending could support not only diverse knowledges, but less harmful knowledges? And I wonder if Curious Bodies might be a kind of phenological practice. Referencing the work of Frederick Douglass, writer Ta-Nehisi Coates says that, quote, the tradition of writing, of drawing out a common humanity, is indispensable to our future, if only because what must be cultivated and cared for must first be seen, end quote. Through free writing, slow looking, and ekphrasis, Curious Bodies proposes a framework for expansive seeing and finding out how responsible you are to the world around you, as in how able you are to respond. It is a framework for figuring how you feel, think, and word, how you imagine and sound that experience out, to cultivate imaginative and political agency. It's the way of inhabiting Annie Fletcher's provocation. If we can't listen to what we don't want to hear, what hope do we have? I'll finish up with this. On a rainy Thursday afternoon this past February, some Curious Bodies and I spent about 2.5 hours viewing Daria's Night Flowers by Iranian filmmaker Mariam Tafakori at Project Art Centre. Free writing, questioning, conversing. According to the exhibition notes, the film Daria's Night Flowers functions as a fragmented essayistic text, merging found footage and scripted narrative elements rich in colour and subtext, weaving together research into representations, or the lack thereof, of women, queer stories and desire in post-revolution Iranian cinema. One student's response to the exhibition was exasperation. What are we supposed to do? We sat in silence a while, processing this demanding question. And in that silence, what seemed to echo was the unsaid of the question. When I feel like I have no agency. I invited each student to share a sentence or fragment of their free writing. We will write a cento, I said. A cento is a poem made up of fragments, sentences from other poems. If I'd had my wits about me, I might have quoted Marilyn Nelson, who imagines that writing a poem is like holding a shield up as you go into the world. She says that the poem is, quote, something you create, but it's also something that becomes your protection from the pain and ugliness that you have to see. You have to see it, but you also have to, I think, protect your essential innocence. And then, after it's written and in the world, it can be a shield for other people. It can be what people hold on to when they're needing something, end quote. Or I might have quoted Ta-Nehisi Coates again, who reminds us that the arts tell us what is possible and what is not, because, among other things, they tell us who is human and who is not. As a way of summoning agency, of practicing the possible of politics, and as a trace of our individual and collective perplexity in the face of Mariam Tafakuri's film, we made this poem together. Daria's Night Flowers. I am fairly sure this is about murder. Was it supposed to be inspiring or heroic? Gentle beatings from a handsome man, you can't divorce him. Experiment and make it messy. Functioning to unsettle, the substance makes no promise. A passenger of will passing on to you, ebb and vanish. The way we live is proof that something is not right. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I mean, if anyone was to try and encapsulate all of the threads and themes that are running through the discussions today, I think you've done it very eloquently. I think the frameworks that you've developed in terms around the processes, particularly of free writing, slow looking, a praxis which is a new one on me in language terms, are just so critically important at the moment. And I mean, you're referencing essentially, you know, what Sweetwater Foundation has referenced in terms of just coming back to the understanding of the interconnectedness of everything. And it's the position that we now have to come from in all things. We were never separate from anything else. It was just a story that we have been told. And I think what you're talking about is giving young people and students the agency to push against the normative structures that we believe are what is, and only by being able to push against the social, societal, political constructs that we have today can we make something that is better and new and build something for the future. So thank you so much for those thoughts. Our final speaker today, no pressure, Karl, is Karl Toomey. And Karl is a designer. He is an incredibly curious person and imaginative thinker. He is an educator. He works at a strategic design consultancy called Wove, where they focus on education, climate and culture as core themes. He has worked with many civic sectors and many businesses, but he very much uses the idea of design and play and culture and how we might drive social innovation. He's currently lecturing at the Barcelona School of Art and Design, and he also lectures at IADT and NCAD from time to time. But in January, when I was in the middle of a puddle on a dark day of rain, I came across this project which he created, which was called 31 Days of Being More Human. And it just brought a lot of light and a little bit of laughter and a lot of hope into my heart. So that's why I've invited Karl to share his 31 days of being more human with you.
Yes, I suppose the first thing to say is I'm coming at today's topic, measuring what matters, from the perspective of a designer. So somebody who's involved and very curious about the services and spaces and I suppose initiatives that people engage with on a day-to-day basis. And really I'm quite interested in how you can put more joy, imagination and generosity into those services and spaces. I thought I'd share this quote I only recently came across from former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, which says, "We need to get excited about the future that's just around the corner. We need a more imagined future. We need to talk more about where we want to be." And I suppose what I really love about this quote is it feels like a rallying cry or an invitation to use more creativity and more imagination in our services and spaces. And I suppose when you hear it from someone like Mary Robinson, it almost feels like permission to imagine more. But I suppose something I've observed when I'm working on my own day-to-day projects and work, or working with students, or doing my own research projects, it can often be hard to give ourselves permission to imagine, and it can be hard to actually see other ways, think about other ways of thinking and approaching projects. So as Louise mentioned, in January of this year, when things tend to be quite gloomy, I ran a small, very, very, very small project just called 31 Days of Being More Human, which was essentially a social media series where I shared a different project every day that I felt pointed to more creative, more generous, more joyful ways of doing things. And I suppose, well, worth saying, really, my intention was to put these projects in front of other designers, other people who are working on these services, but I suppose they're interesting to absolutely whoever's interested. I don't have time to go through all 31 projects right now. I'd like to, but I think I'd probably fry our brains. So I've just picked out, I think, 6 that might connect to the themes today. I just want to caveat them, though, that I definitely don't think all of these are long-term solutions that are addressing the systematic issues we're talking about today, nor do I think they're all workable in an Irish context. More I just see them as seeds of possibility and little provocations to think differently. So the first 3 projects I was going to show really are clustered around this question of what happens when we innovate for dignity and care rather than efficiency. So this first project is called the Restaurant of Mistaken Orders, and it's a restaurant in Tokyo. And it's essentially all the serving staff who work there are people living with dementia. So this project was set up on the back of Japan has a significant increase in people living with dementia. And also there's a strong research has shown the strong links between increased social isolation, feelings of loneliness, feeling like you're forgotten from society. So this project was set up essentially to create space for greater compassion and connection. So it's really, really lovely project. And thinking about, I suppose, today's topic of measuring what matters, there's a lovely quote on the website for this restaurant where it says, I think it's 37% of orders are delivered wrong, but 99% of customers are happy. I think it really, really gets to the heart of it. This next project is from Glasgow Children's Hospital, and this is about 2 years old. So they introduced the world's first gamer in residence, so a whole new role for someone who works in the hospital. And I love this, that they essentially go around the hospital with a hospital trolley full of Xboxes and PlayStations and Nintendos, and essentially play games with children who are receiving care and staying in the hospital. And it came about based on, I think, NHS research around lower levels of anxiety amongst children, and in some cases even lower feelings of pain while playing video games in a hospital setting. So really, really lovely, direct sort of dream job. And this role has since been rolled out other kind of NHS hospitals. So lovely, really simple. I'd like that job. This second 2 projects I was going to show, really, I've tried to frame them around like what happens when communities build for local joy rather than global scale. So this is a project, this is from the French town of Moine-Sartoux, and this project started in 1998, and it started as a reaction to the mad cow disease crisis, which you might remember. And essentially the crisis provoked the town to ask themselves, what are we actually feeding our children in schools as part of their school lunches? And more broadly, what are we feeding ourselves? Probably not too dissimilar to questions we're asking today about ultra-processed foods. So they did lots of very, very innovative things to try and explore the food systems within the school and within the town. One of which was actually making farmers civil servants and assigning, pulling them in as part of the public working body, which is really amazing. But the main, I suppose, impact they did was they changed public procurement rules so that local small farmers and independent businesses could start supplying ingredients and food to their schools, which is really simple but really impactful. And I think it was within, this is a long-term project, but within 10 to 12 years, I think it's 100% of all the food that's served in their schools is A, organic, and B, grown mostly locally. But the really impressive thing is it's done at no extra cost. It's not more expensive than the system that it replaced, which is pretty amazing. And they do a really good job of sharing resources and education. I think this has been rolled out to 6 other European cities, so pretty good. This next project is called the Agency of Change. I've been lucky enough to be involved in this project over a number of years in a few different ways. But essentially, I suppose it's like a creative cultural entrepreneurship program that originated in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro. But the methodology has since been brought over to the UK in lots of different cities, including Belfast, just up the road. And I suppose the core idea of this program is that it sees young people as the solutions to our cities, and they're the ones who should be empowered and given agency to shape and imagine the future of their own neighbourhoods. So it's a program that young people go on, and I think it's been going since 2013 in the UK, and young people have set up food businesses, community radio stations, social enterprises. And I think at the moment it's something like 160 full-time jobs have been created, and there's 32 ongoing social enterprises. So really, really impactful. I'm probably not doing it justice. I'm going through everything in a very shallow way, but it's a very impressive program. And then the last 2 projects I'm going to show are clustered around the question, what happens when we design with future generations in mind? So I thought I'd throw in something maybe related to biodiversity. And this just happened in January of this year. So it's a bit of a grainy photo. You can't really see it, but swift birds have been, I think they've been in decline. They've declined about 60% since the end of the 90s, and largely to do with modern buildings sealing up the gaps and crevices between them where these birds would have nested. So in January of this year, the Scottish Parliament ruled that all new buildings must have these swift bricks in them, which you can see here on the left. So they have built-in little nesting crevices in them, which is a really simple, lovely idea where I love the product innovation, but also on a policy level where they align really well. So really, really hopeful little project. Then the last project I'm going to show is from the Swedish city of Eskilstuna, which I hope I've said right. And this is another longer-term project, but in 2015, as part of the city's climate strategy, they launched Retuna, which is the world's first shopping centre selling entirely repaired, reused, or upcycled goods. So it's like a living social version of the circular economy. It's like any other big shopping centre. It has shops dedicated to toys, fashion, books, like everything you could need, but nothing's new. Nothing's new at all, which I really, really love. It also is a point for donations. There's workshops, there's educational events. So it's a really, really lovely twist on the, I suppose, consumption shopping experience. I've gone through these very quickly, and sorry about that. And as I mentioned, maybe in a little bit of a shallow way, but I've built this little database called the Library of Joyful Innovation, where I've uploaded all of these projects, and I think there's about 40, 50 projects up there at the moment, and I'm going to keep adding to them. Some range from more radical, 1 or 2 are even, I would say, borderline illegal, but they're still inspiring. So if you're curious, I'll put up the link right now, but which is this, and that's a QR code for it as well. The link is tiny URL being more human, or that's the link. But yeah, I've really, really, really found the presentations today incredibly inspiring, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks again, Karl. If I have had the opportunity to go into the Library of Joyful Innovation, it's very joyful. So I highly, highly recommend it. And I just think it's so important right now to, for people like Karl and all of us in this room to be sharing those stories of positivity and joy and possibility. You know, a lot of our news is so dark at the moment. I don't understand why we don't have more joyful, possible, imaginative, creative, engaging news stories that we share across all of our main media outlets. So that's just a shout out for that. So I'm delighted to welcome back on stage Emmanuel Pratt. I'm not going to introduce anybody because they already have been introduced. Sarah Glennie, Jessica Foley and Philip Crowe. And sorry, I will make one introduction, who's PJ Matthews, our Director of the Creative Futures Academy at University College Dublin, who is going to chair this session. As you said, we definitely want your engagement and questions from the floor. There is one roving mic going around, so please raise your hand when you have a question. And I think that's all I have to say. We'll run the panel for about 30 minutes or so, roughly, just to give you time to have chats afterwards. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. Good afternoon, everybody. What a great morning we've had. And inspired by Karl, I think I'm going to propose that we have 31 minutes of being more human. The big takeaway this morning, I think, is that no matter how bad things are, the human capacity to overcome the darkness is a phenomenal thing. It really is. That's one of the great lessons of everything we've heard this morning. The centrality of arts, creativity, culture to social transformation is unmistakable. And the other thing is that the fact that it's not necessarily conventionally measured. So that's the reason why we put this panel this morning together, really, is to talk about creativity, culture, social transformation, all of those great things that we've heard about this morning that are not easily measured in terms of our standard economic KPIs, if you like. So let's have a couple of follow-up questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And I want to start with Emmanuel. When he was speaking, one of the things the words that resonated with me, and I think probably with a lot of people in the room, you mentioned blight. Once you mentioned that in Ireland, it's like, oh, yeah, blight, degeneration, and regeneration. And it struck me that, we have our own story that's different but parallel in a sense. So if we think of 19th century Ireland and the famine and the degeneration that happens after that, and then the moment of revival that we had during the Irish cultural revival, which was an extraordinary moment of social transformation in which artists and activists played a massive role. So those resonances are very much in the room, I think. And, Louise mentioned earlier on about alignments and so forth. And your work is amazing. One of the things that I did want to ask you about, though, is there ever a tension between the project in terms of the balance between the defiance of it, the audacity of it, the activism side, and the practicality side, I guess. So how do you square that? And I'm sure when you have a group of really creative people around the table who say, let's do this, let's do that, do you have a lodestone, or do you have a kind of a mission statement, or that keeps you on track in relation to that?
Yeah. So is there ever a tension? Is there ever not a tension? Is the most appropriate, I think. I mean, we talked about this earlier. It's an interesting challenge of living with tension, in tension. Like, we actually live with a sense of purpose, which constantly means I'm in tension with everything around. Like, there's an interesting hypocrisy there. So our intention is to live intentionally. But then when you're talking to somebody outside of that, let's say politician, who's lost a sense of purpose, if the purpose is in 4 years and our time scale is I have to get reelected, I have to do this, I have to do ROI, for us it's return on investment. I have to prove this X amount of jobs and X amount of whatever. And you're saying you want to do a generational fix in 4 years, which is fundamentally impossible. And you want to promise millions of dollars in a short-term investment, it's fundamentally impossible, then we're going to exist in tension. Because my job is to be a reality check to your hypocrisy. So this goes back to the question, which was a great question about, like, what's your relationship with either politics or whatever. The quote that was mentioned, you said with Ta-Nehisi Coates, about and this is coming full circle, like back to the original question, I challenge that, if you say politics is the art of the possible, but art creates the possible of politics, what happens when both have lost their purpose? Because we have too many speculations of artists or politicians that are predatory on hope without accountability. I want to do this provocation about, the possibility of this and that and the other, and I get all excited, politicians and artists. But no deliverance on what is actually possible. So there's a phronesis, there's actually, what's the practical wisdom that you then can apply, like your projects, where you're like, how do we actually raise humans to become better humans? Phronesis, how do we make ourselves more ecologically aware and have a sense of purpose so it's not just our short-sightedness? And then, so coming full circle, there is not a moment where we're not in tension. And we have to design actively the physical thing. The choice of the garden, somebody was asking, how do you make decisions? Well, our community was like, what food do you want to eat? What's in your culture and heritage? What have we lost touch with? What memories can we reactivate? So in the first, we start with what do we grow? Why do we grow? How do you let it grow? And then people are like, well, I can't eat that because it got holes in it. Well, why does it got holes? Well, we don't use chemicals. We don't use pesticides. We don't use herbicides. Then you design the garden beds. Then you're like, what height is the garden bed? It's comfortable for an elder to sit. Why? Because the elder has to be there to be a point of knowledge and curation, to have an interaction with a youth, to see possibility and hope in each other so they can listen to each other. What height for a wheelbarrow? All the practical dimensions of the actual designed object. It's not just a pretty sculptural thing. And half the times it's devalued because it's not the pretty sculptural thing that has no purpose. So I don't know if I answered the question.
I think you did, actually. I think what you're giving us there is the sweet spot between the real and the ideal. Right there.
One more thing on this, though, just because like the metrics thing, that's what we're here supposed to be. We have a tension with the city or politicians and businesses because we do the human thing. We do the ecological thing. It has a different timeline. And we tell them these are the metrics in a different time scale. That's unacceptable. Then I have a limited respect for you. I have no choice to do what we do. So our metric, we offer you an alternative metric, and you say it's the right thing to do, so the policies reflect our language, sometimes 4 to 6 years after we said it. We're like, ain't this some... why are you using my language? You were so obsessed with these metrics and using this language to fund this thing for the return on investment. And here we are 6 years later, in our case, almost 20 years later, a generational outlook. You said this when we were on the tour. A generational outlook of you saying the same thing. We've been doing it, but you don't codify it in a way that respects what is actually matter, what metric really matters. So
yeah, okay. Inspiring perspectives. Sarah, I'm going to move on to you very quickly. And in the higher education space, and particularly as we three partners are interested in the creative and performing arts and all of the arts and all of the disciplines around all of that, sometimes we have to talk about how we contribute to the economy and prepare students for work, the world of work and so forth. But isn't it also an important mission, the kind of things that we're talking about today? And as in your capacity, in your position in NCAD, how do you see those kind of two sides of the coin? Yeah.
Well, it's a big question, but I think picking up on something Emmanuel was saying about length of time, a couple of things that, yes, we do, and that is something I have to do a lot in writing funding applications and particularly thinking about the campus and trying to kind of make that case. So, and often drawing on, what we call smoke and mirrors a little bit, to try and kind of say the right thing to the right people. I think there is a shared voice and a shared knowledge that we have collectively. And there's a lot we can do if we bring that together across a range of sectors and thinking and activation, and not worry about too much about who we are, but just look at the different impacts of what we do and tell those stories differently. But I think there's a couple of things we think, I think of the potential of a space like NCAD has, and UCD and IDT and the kind of the education space. The first is the challenge to the students. I mean, Emmanuel's going to be talking to students today and tomorrow, and he's really earning his keep while he's here. That would be a very important thing for them to hear. But I think, the one thing I hope they hear is go out and make themselves what they want to see happen. Don't wait for somebody to decide you're an artist, you're a designer, you're this, you're that. Just take the skills you've got and bring them into a range of different spaces across society. Make those spaces, change the spaces you go into. Think for yourself. And I think there's a huge obligation on us to empower our students to feel like that, feel that they have, as creative students, they have a unique and very powerful set of tools available to them to go out into the world and do things differently. I think the other thing is for us to think as an institution how we can use what we have at our disposal to make the spaces we are in better. And I'm thinking a bit of the kind of thinking of Rialto Youth Project. And, we've had a very long-term relationship with Rialto Youth Project, but it's been a bit one-sided. That it's an incredible learning space for our students. And we've had generations of students who've had really transformative periods of time working with Rialto Youth Project and learning from them, but we haven't necessarily given back. And I think that's what we need to kind of now start to change a bit. And as we're beginning to unlock research funding more available to us, how we use that wisely, how we use that to be a kind of a generative range of work that happens beyond the institution is very exciting to think about. And that's, coming back to what Fiona was saying and Emmanuel about time, that's one of the spaces in which time can be allowed for things to really take root. And that is needed. A lot of the funding for culture is really short-term. It's all project-based. It's all based on public outcome. And sometimes you need to be able to support things to start, grow, develop, and really be embedded over a period of time. And that's something higher education institutions can do. I've kind of worked in both spaces, so I can really see that potential. So I think we have to kind of take the language of what it is we want to do with research and what that means for us in terms of creative practice, and educate others around us as to what that potential could be. And, we were visited by colleagues from Research Ireland in NCD a few months ago. Now, Fiona couldn't be there, but we presented Fiona's work on her behalf. And it was fun. You could see a real penny drop of like, oh, actually, yeah, this, artists aren't just funded by the Arts Council. This kind of work is different. That this kind of work is artists working in research. So I think it's us. Sorry, I'm sort of, my mind has been spiraling a bit this morning, but I think it's kind of, we have a range of things available to us, and we are educational institutions in the creative space, so we need to think, okay, how can we bring those tools we've got and kind of learn from spaces like Emmanuel, where we're kind of hustling, changing, making people see things differently and changing the language around us rather than trying to sort of justify ourselves necessarily in the language that's been given to us.
Great.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, great perspectives there. I'm conscious that people want to come in, but I do want to just quickly go to our other two panelists. Jessica, picking up on a point that Sarah made, and I loved your art creates the possible of politics. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And Sarah was talking about creating spaces, particularly for students who are going down a vocational route and know where they want to do and what their world of work will look like, for them to discover other dimensions of themselves, of their being, that are not present to themselves. I mean, I think that's very much the space that you've been working in your module you told us about.
Yeah, I've been working in higher education for a long time, like going through research, climbing all the ladders of all the different degrees you do, and I suppose what I'm up against is the feeling that educational institutions are kind of legacy institutions. They're shaped by, colonial values and all sorts of things. There's lots of, you know, and neoliberal values. There are all these kind of pressures on educational spaces. So what is so important, or this is maybe a misguided belief that I have, but I think it's important to try and create space, given those pressures, to try and create space where, you know, questions can be asked, reflection can happen in a slower way, and that we can acknowledge that we are caught up in so many hypocrisies and there are so many contradictions that are shaping the choices that we make, which eventually leads to maybe a sense of purpose, what Emmanuel is talking to. But I mean, it's questionable whether people going through the education system actually can develop their unique and, you know, social sense of purpose, what they grew up with. Like Emmanuel's presentation where he showed us his grandmother and his mother. Like, this is real life, you know? And what I'm doing, and again, I sometimes feel like I'm an idiot, but is trying to make space for that kind of real reality check, the sanity check. Yeah. And it's really hard, and I don't know if it's even possible. But I know that from working with students, how relieved they are when they are given space to speak to each other and to think, and they are not given that space very often. Yeah. And actually, no one is. Yeah. And that is why I chose Ta-Nehisi Coates, that possibility of politics, because we actually do not know what politics feels like. You're creating it, you know, but most of us feel placeless, drifting, you know, and I do, certainly. And I'm, you know, ostensibly somebody who has achieved success, you know, but it doesn't feel that way. And I question, well, why is that the case? And what do we need to do? There are great things happening in NCAD, in UCD, and in IADT. Like, recently, we've started planting a teaching glade, thanks to Clyde Doyle and many others, who have set up 10,000 trees that are being planted. We have a textile garden being developed. Like, there is a kind of an attention turning towards land. And I think we really do need to do that kind of place-based work that Fiona and Gillian are doing. And that means slowing down the tempo of education. Absolutely.
Great perspectives. Speaking of place-based work, Philip, really enjoyed your case study, the story from Ballina, and how I was struck by the way in which you tapped into something that all of us silently see things as we walk around, and whatever it is, whether it's, you know, small things wrong with our places that we live, but you managed to kind of connect all of that up to some kind of collective action in a really extraordinary way. In terms of the lasting impact in Ballina now, do you think there's momentum building? And also I'd be interested in the role that the artists play in all of this as well. So isn't there a difference between a project that has a spreadsheet and a strategic plan, but when you bring an artist into it, what does that do, or how does that somehow transform the modalities and the possibilities of a project?
I think it very much depends on the artist, because I'm not sure we can put all artists into one group. I mean, certainly in that experience, we had a number of artists that interacted with us, but Rhiannoch was very much involved in every aspect of the project. It wasn't, this is what the artist does. So she informed every aspect of it in terms of how do we communicate with people, how's the project structured, and certainly just made us question conventions and assumptions that we might have been working with. And I think what is slightly frustrating about working in a university is that you do tend to be put into silos. And what we're trying to do is not only work between disciplines, because we have so much to learn from one another, but also to work with other sectors. So we're working with a local business, and then also with politicians. And politics in an Irish town, as you know, is incredibly local. It really opened my eyes. I mean, I was sitting looking in front of a cafe one time, looking out onto a street, and this guy came past, and with the councillor that we were working with, and this guy came past on his mobile wheelchair and stopped in front of us, turned to us and said, "Mark, you do know that there's more weeds have grown up in the Killala Road opposite so-and-so." And I was speechless, but Mark immediately knew how to deal with this, and the local politics is very real, in these places, and everybody. So that we had an outdoor meeting with the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and independent councillors who were all there. Anybody could come up to them. They were incredibly accessible. But I think you asked, what's the long-term effect of it? I mean, that is always my frustration. What I would love is that we could almost be resident in a town over a period of time, and it wouldn't necessarily need to have the same students or the same staff working on it, but that we were embedded in a place. Yeah. There's a particular building, I don't know if anybody knows it, called Providers in Longford, which is just the most amazing, innovative 1960s building sitting in the middle of Longford Main Street, which is largely vacant, which is one of the big problems in our towns. But we have a fantasy of taking up residence in that building, and really trying to engage with the community, integrate with the community, but also it provides this incredible educational tool, because I think, Emmanuel, you inferred that the teaching of architecture is a slightly unusual activity. We would have lots of question marks over how that is taught. Get the students into the places, listening, seeing, using their imagination, and it could be the making. Where would that go? I don't know.
Thanks.
That would be the dream.
Thanks so much, Philip. Okay, now it's time to open up to the floor. I'm sure there must be lots of comments and questions. Could I ask, if you do have a question, that you kind of be concise and keep it short, and then maybe if the responders might also be mindful of time, try and so we get as many voices as we can into the conversation. So let's throw it open. I think is there a roving microphone going around somewhere? Yeah, there is. So anybody want to jump in? Yeah, there's somebody over there.
This is a question for Emmanuel. I thought the inclusion of the American flag was really powerful and interesting in the one of the
on the workshop.
In the workshop.
Yeah, we caught hell for that.
Yeah, really. Well, I was wondering, in what way does your work intersect with? Of course, it's political, but activism, especially now with ICE and everything in Chicago, the way it is. How do you respond to that?
Yeesh. That's a dissertation. The first thing was the flag. The flag, we caught hell for it. That was actually an art installation we did in a 2015 architecture biennial in a gallery space that questioned the ecology of absence with a question mark. We put it in our gallery using crates and pallets, using localized labor, apprentices, folks from schools in a university gallery context that was opened up to us, which was cool. We left the nails poking out of the flag because it was a pallet. We inverted the flag stars. It was stained. But people were like, well, how dare you, whatever, the flag. I don't know. It was weird. But it was interesting because people said, well, this is what Dr. King spoke to the other America in his speech, and what the realities of everyone else that is not in the 1 or 2% lives. Everyone. And it's the same questions for decades around the quality of education, the quality of housing, the quality of work, the quality of this. And this goes back again full circle to the metrics question. It's if we're asking the same things over and over and over and over again, we know what we're supposed to do. And you put money towards these big mega developments that have lost timelines. If you actually look at the time scale of a project like ours, it costs way less. It costs so much less to do what we do than what is often proposed on these ridiculous, absurd timescales. They're just not even true. People, we'll do this in this time, and people are waiting, and people are waiting, and people are waiting, and they're constantly losing hope, and then they get apathetic, and then you go to the next generation who cares even less. They have less purpose. So with respect to the context within which we work, we are unapologetic in our reality and our dedication to the possibility of a future. We have people who are constantly fearing for their lives right now. not just because of police, because of new regimes, because of new whatever. It's even when you have the evidence that you exist. I'm not going to go into all the politics of it. There's ICE at the airports right now to fill in for TSA. So even when you have proof of your existence, let me get back to the metrics question. You're told that you don't exist. That's what's happening right now in the States. I mean, you can look up any story about what I'm talking about. But like, you have proof that you exist, and you have evidence, hand over hand, over fist, over fist, over fist, over, and you don't exist. So then the question is like, what is it gonna take for you to acknowledge my existence? You say that you want a country that's better. We provide it. You say you want better food in restaurants, but now you've lost the workers who do make that possible. You say you want a better country in Ireland. You want regeneration. You have people that are doing it every day. They live it. At what point does a reconciliation of the costs that the false promises, just acknowledge it. Have the uncomfortable conversation. Be real about it. It costs less to do the things that we do to exist and survive. It just fundamentally costs less. It costs less to care. I mean, it's an absurd statement. It costs so much less to just care. But the time scale of caring don't benefit the select few. So I don't know, like the whole political thing. Like, we've been through versions of madness before. We have folks. We can't get people to vote right now because they have no hope or no care. They have no belief that politicians will ever matter. That's how lost people are right now. That's sad.
Thanks. Any other questions? There's another audience member here.
I'm sort of getting a message about slowness and time and our very weird perception of time. So I just wanted to know, have you any helpful suggestions about how we argue for slowness to create sustainable futures in a world obsessed with fast cycles of development and KPIs and that context of everything from applying for a research grant to teaching to getting a job? Everything is about fast.
KPI for translation for me is what, again?
It's key performance indicator.
Key performance. I wish we had a key
Yeah,
performance.
it's
We
that
have
kind
a
of
return
thing.
on investment is a ROI, and it's an 18-month like finite.
So how do you argue for slowness?
I'm going to put it to you all. I think the role of universities is supposed to be a space to hold, to allow for the research and to be rigorous and due and honest about like the return or the key performance. The space should be slow. It should be a space for people to like appreciate time in universities, in research. And it also has to be value relational. It has to, like you just mentioned, it has to be reflective of the people that you're working with. And it also ought to reflect the realities that like this thing that was proposed just doesn't work. It should be honest. It should be a space of that. But then people are fearful about like, I mean, I get it, funding and resources and what have you, but it should be that space. The interstitial spaces that we visited within the CAD, like with Sodine, we went to the other spaces, like we found people who were finding refuge in the spaces in between. They were like, I can't find space in my classes. I can't find hope in my country because I'm losing hope in this other stuff. I'm a refugee from wherever because there's war here or whatever. But I found my space and purpose in this little lost, like, in-between space. And they found slowness, which allowed them to not be depressed. So the research in the universities is the space. It should be. It's the purpose. What's the purpose of having a university otherwise?
I think I'm looking at. Oh, sorry. Did somebody else want to? Did you want to come in? Well, yeah. Go ahead,
I
Jessica.
just want to say
Yeah.
I agree. On the record. I think that's great. I think that's why I was drawn into education and learning spaces, and that they can, that shouldn't our universities be those kind of spaces? And, and they should be porous and they should be rigorous, like you say. So yeah, I want to agree wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've probably reached our limit now in terms of this morning's activities. I know we have some closing remarks to come, but it was hopefully 31 minutes of being more human. I think that's what we've all learned today. And also the whole idea of appreciating the value of culture beyond the purely economic, I think has been a theme that's very much been championed here this morning in all sorts of interesting and imaginative ways. So can I thank my panelists for all of their wonderful insights. And just to hand back now to Louise for our closing remarks. Thank you.
I'll be very brief because I think all our heads are very full. I suppose with the level and endless possibility that we all face, and I suppose the requirement maybe to step up to the table in that place. I mean, this idea that it costs less to care and yet we are also careless. Not necessarily us individually, but as societies we tend to be a little bit careless. I think we've illustrated the impact of imagination, curiosity, creativity in very, very many contexts. We need other people to hear that message, and I'm delighted because I know there's a lot of people who are not necessarily from a creative background in the room today, and they're the audiences that we really need to drill home this message to. I suppose the one resounding thing that I'm going to go back to, which is I think where Emmanuel started this whole presentation, is here grows the neighbourhood. I mean, we are the neighbourhood, we are the community, so it would be great to see more of this connectivity, more of this collective action. It is so, so important that we come together, that we don't stand apart, and that we understand the level of connection, interconnectivity, the ecology of what it is to be a human being at this point in time on a planet that is in crisis, and that we all have a responsibility to stand up, be counted, and to try and do something about that. And I hope that we've shown that there's an awful lot of potential there. There's a lot of hope there, and there are so, so many people doing so many good things and good work. And actually it's upon us to support that and to amplify that in as many ways as we can. So here grows the neighbourhood. In the interests of metrics and measurement, I thought there was going to be a QR code popping up there with the survey, but I'm not sure if we have one. So if we don't, we do have one. Okay. Well, anyway, before you, or we'll email it. Before you all leave, just to shout out a big thank you. Emmanuel and his entire family travelled over all the way from Chicago. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. To all our incredibly inspirational and eloquent speakers, to Philip, to Fiona, Gillian, Jessica, to Karl, to Sarah, and of course to PJ for moderating the discussion today. Thank you. And just to say there's a huge team of work and people who have made this happen today, so thank you all. You know who you are. I won't name you. Please carry on the conversation upstairs if you will. Fill out that QR code because we need to be measured and accounted for when you get it. And we will see you. Keep an eye on Creative Futures Academy. There will be more of these conversations happening. Thank you.